Did you hear what happened this morning at a global summit? President Xi Jinping warned of Africa's fragile governance. He didn't name names, but Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso didn't wait for permission. He faced 92 world leaders and delivered a response that hit 1 million views before he left the stage. One sentence silenced them all. Africa is not chaos, it is history. And this time, we are not asking. The president of Burkina Faso, barely past 30, dressed in his military uniform, calm and unshaken among a sea of designer suits, a man from a country the media rarely mentions. Yet today, all eyes were on him. It happened at the Global Leadership Summit in Geneva, a gathering of the most powerful people on Earth. Presidents, prime ministers, billionaires and tech titans sat shoulder to shoulder beneath chandeliers that cost more than most villages. They came to talk about peace, growth, and the future of humanity, at least on paper, but no one expected something real to happen. Traoré didn't show up for the network. He showed up to make the room hold its breath. Stay with us because what you're about to hear might just make history. Just minutes after the summit began, the stage lights dimmed, and the first major speaker stepped forward. President Xi Jinping, known for his polished rhetoric and commanding presence. He wore a charcoal grey suit, walked with calm precision, and stood before the mic like a man used to silencing entire rooms. His voice was measured low, deliberate, a voice that didn't shout, because it never had to. He spoke of global harmony, mutual development, and the Belt and Road. He praised cooperation, dismissed isolation, and then paused. A pause sharpened not by drama, but by calculation. When you look at Africa, he said, eyes sweeping the room slowly, we see potential weighed down by instability. Leaders without clear vision. Institutions still struggling to mature. If progress is to be shared, then order must come first. The words were soft, but they hit like iron wrapped in silk. A few awkward chuckles rippled through the room. Some leaders shifted in their seats, uncertain whether to applaud object or pretend they hadn't heard. A few nodded, perhaps out of habit or fear of standing out. Cameras blinked, eyes darted. The marble floors and golden chandeliers suddenly felt colder, heavier. But on the far side of the room, Ibrahim Traoré did not flinch. He didn't smirk. He didn't look around to see who was watching. He simply rose slowly, deliberately, as if this moment had been etched into him long ago. The sound of his boots against polished stone echoed through the hall. In the stunned silence, a few heads turned. Then more. Security straightened. Journalists reached for their pens. All eyes began to track his path as he moved toward the center aisle, not rushing, not hesitating. Each step carried weight. Each step spoke louder than protocol ever could. He reached the front, but didn't touch the podium. He didn't adjust his collar. His hands stayed by his sides. Then eyes locked on Xi Jinping. Traoré said clearly, and without hesitation, with all due respect, Mr. Xi, Africa is not yours to diagnose. The room froze. You could almost hear hearts skip. Heads turned so fast it was audible. Some gasped. Others reached instinctively for their phones. The media booth lit up in red recording lights. But Traoré wasn't yelling. He wasn't even angry. His voice carried something heavier. His uniform deep earth tones, clean undecorated, stood in bold contrast against tuxedos and navy suits. The small flag of Burkina Faso on his chest shimmered beneath the lights. His posture was upright, but not stiff, the kind of stillness that doesn't come from training, but from truth. He looked as if generations had climbed onto his shoulders, and instead of collapsing, he stood taller. All cameras were on him now, all whispers silenced. What began as another diplomatic gathering had shifted. The air no longer reeked of rehearsed speeches. It pulsed with something real, something raw. Then Traoré took one step forward, not toward Xi, but toward the heart of the room. The crowd parted. A stage unplanned unfolded around him. He spoke not with rage, not with performance, but with clarity so sharp it made the ornate ceiling feel suddenly too small. Africa is not instability. Africa is not confusion. Africa is history. Resilience. The room didn't move, but it listened. This wasn't silence from awkwardness anymore. This was the kind of silence that comes when truth breaks through polished lies. Traoré had no notes. His words were precise, steady, like he was speaking through the centuries. When your ancestors arrived on our soil, he said, they didn't find chaos. They found civilizations, gold, wisdom, kingdoms that traded, healed, taught, and lived in balance. He paused. Then, what came after was not a partnership, it was plunder. You drew borders with no regard for language, tribe, or history. You enslaved generations, and when we finally won independence, we inherited systems never meant to serve us. They were built to fail. A flicker of discomfort crossed some faces. Others leaned forward. The truth was raw. It scraped off the diplomatic polish and exposed the scaffolding of hypocrisy underneath. Yes, we have problems. Traoré continued, but let me ask you why. Because your phones run on our minerals. Your desserts are sweetened by our cocoa. Your cars and factories are fueled by our oil. He paused again, letting the contrast hang in the air like smoke. And in return, he said quietly, our children eat once a day if they're lucky. Our youth walk streets with degrees in hand and no jobs to go to. Our hospitals lack medicine, while our resources fill your vaults. A few leaders looked down. Others exchanged uneasy glances. No one interrupted. No one dared. You call us corrupt, he said slowly. But what do you call the Western companies who pay bribes to steal what's ours? What do you call the tax havens where African billions disappear? The banks that welcome the wealth of our dictators? The silence when wars erupt over contracts signed in your boardrooms? Now even the journalists, seasoned and detached, were scribbling faster. Traoré hadn't raised his voice once, but the walls seemed to echo with the weight of everything unsaid for decades. He wasn't there to accuse blindly. He was holding up a mirror, one the world had tried not to look into. And still he spoke without bitterness. Just truth. Truth that didn't ask for sympathy. It demanded reckoning. And outside those walls in cities and villages across Africa, millions would soon hear these words and realize they'd just been spoken, not behind closed doors, but in the heart of power itself. Traoré let the silence settle for just a moment longer, long enough for the truth he'd spoken to echo in the bones of every person in the room. Then, with a softer voice and a steady breath, he said, let me tell you a story, a real one. His tone shifted not to plead, not to dramatize, but to bring something personal into a room where policy too often forgets people. There's a boy in a small village in Burkina Faso. His name is Malik. He's 12 years old. And the name alone carried weight. He wasn't a statistic. He wasn't a headline. He was someone's child. Every morning before the sun rises, Malik wakes up. He doesn't get ready for school. He grabs a plastic container and walks 6 miles barefoot, not to explore, not to play, but to fetch water for his mother and younger siblings. Traoré paused not. He continued. He passes gold mines, shining hills of wealth, gold that leaves our soil and ends up in your jewelry stores, your smartphones, your private vaults. Gold he'll never touch. Someone near the front wiped their eyes. Xi Jinping sat still, expression unreadable. When Malik returns, Traoré said softly, he eats one small meal, sometimes none. Then by candlelight, if there's wax left, he studies. He doesn't dream of Europe. He doesn't dream of escaping. He dreams of becoming an engineer, not to leave Africa, but to rebuild it, to dig wells, so no child has to walk 6 miles like he does, to build roads and hospitals, so his village can live with dignity. There was a long pause. That boy's dream is not a visa. It's not a plane ticket. It's justice. It's dignity. A collective breath passed through the audience. Some looked down. Others looked at him and saw not just a president, but a man carrying the weight of every child, like Malik. Even the journalists trained to detach from emotion seemed to falter. One woman lowered her pen. Another wiped her glasses, but she wasn't cleaning them. And still Traoré stood firm, not breaking, not blinking. His voice barely raised, yet it filled the space more than any speech before. You ask why we're angry, he said. But the truth is we're not angry. We're awake. Malik doesn't need pity. He needs power. He needs opportunity. He needs a world that doesn't steal his future before he even has a chance to live it. That final line lingered not just in the air, but in the chest. It wasn't just about Malik. It was about millions. It was about every child the world forgets until they grow up with nothing left to give. And right there in a hall, meant for handshakes and hollow promises, Traoré handed back a truth no one could unhear. The story of Malik hadn't just touched hearts. It had shaken something deeper. But Traoré wasn't done. He had stirred the room with pain. Now he would confront it with truth. He turned to face the global leaders in front of him. Not as a politician, begging for aid, but as a man holding up a mirror. And what he said next made even the back row lean in. You talk about corruption, he began. You use the word as though it belongs to us. Some shifted in their seats, others froze. It's not born in dusty villages. It's protected in your banks. It's written into your legal contracts. It's hidden in tax havens you designed. A few advisors glanced nervously at one another, but Traoré continued, voice calm, eyes unblinking. Money stolen from Africa doesn't sit in Africa. It sits in your cities, under your lights, in your glass towers. Corruption doesn't begin in Kinshasa. It begins in Brussels, in Washington, in Dubai. The words didn't echo. They landed. You point fingers at our leaders who take bribes, but who pays them? Western oil companies, mining giants, arms dealers. You judge us for weakness, but you built the chains. Then he lifted his hand slightly, as if pulling the curtain open wider. Right now, as I speak, children in Burkina Faso are digging for gold with bare hands. That gold will never pay for their schools. It will line the pockets of men in Geneva. A boy like Malik walks past those mines every morning. But his father died in one buried alive in a collapse. No one reported working for a foreign firm that left the country without even an apology. His school has no roof. His dreams have no protection. And still we are told to be patient. He stopped briefly and looked across the room as if daring someone to deny it. That boy doesn't need pity. He needs power. Not a charity drive, not a hashtag. He needs the world to stop stealing what was never theirs. The world keeps ignoring. You say Africa has failed. But how can a tree grow if you keep cutting its roots? Every time we rise, you shift the rules. Every time we build, you change the game. Every time we dream, you buy the soil under our feet. A quiet gasp rose from somewhere in the middle. No one laughed, no one dared. Africa was never allowed to succeed. Traoré said, his voice lower now but heavier, as if carrying centuries behind every syllable. From colonial flags to IMF loans, from rigged contracts to stolen voices, we were handed a broken system and blamed for the cracks. He paused, letting the silence settle. We are demanding space to breathe, to create, to rise. His words weren't loud, but they echoed louder than any anthem sung at that summit. This wasn't just a speech anymore. It was a reckoning. The hall was no longer the same room it had been an hour ago. Something irreversible had just happened. And then came the words that sealed it. We are not asking for permission. Africa is ready to stand, and I, Ibrahim Traoré, will stand first. It was quiet for a second, then a single clap, then two, then all at once. The room erupted. Presidents from Latin America stood first, eyes bright, with something more than respect. Ministers from Asia followed, hands raised in applause. Even among the European delegation, a few rose slowly, as if realizing they had just witnessed not a speech, but a shift in history. Some clapped hesitantly, others with conviction. But the standing ovation swept the room like a wave no one could stop. Cameras flashed. Journalists were scribbling furiously. Social media feeds lit up before the summit had even ended. Within minutes, the hashtag #TrueSpeaksTruth was trending, first in Nairobi, then Johannesburg, then Lagos. By the hour's end, it had crossed oceans, appearing on phones in Sao Paulo, London, and New York. Clips of Traoré's speech flooded timelines. One video showing the exact moment Traoré said, "Africa was never allowed to succeed," hit 1 million views before he even left the building. The impact was seismic. In universities across Africa, students gathered in dorm rooms and cafeterias to re-watch the moment. Some stood silently, others cheered. In Ghana, a political science class stopped mid-lecture to project the speech onto a whiteboard. In Nigeria, a rapper dropped a freestyle titled "Stand First," using Traoré's closing line as the chorus. In Kenya, a schoolteacher printed the entire transcript and handed it out as a reading assignment. This, she told her students, is what courage looks like. In Senegal, a street artist painted a mural overnight. Traoré, standing tall, surrounded by children, holding books and tools instead of guns. The words, "Not waiting, rising," were scrolled across the sky. Even beyond Africa, the reaction was staggering. International journalists rewrote headlines, "True challenges she and wins the world's respect." From military jacket to global symbol, Burkina Faso's leader sparked a movement. Influencers, activists, and thinkers who had long been silent on African affairs were now quoting him, tagging his name, dissecting his speech. People who had never even heard of Burkina Faso were Googling it, curious to know more. The shock wasn't that Traoré had spoken. It was that he had spoken so clearly, and the world had finally listened. Back home, the response was electric. In Ouagadougou, thousands poured into the streets. Some waved flags. Others held up phones playing the speech on repeat. Murals appeared overnight. T-shirts with Traoré's face and the words "Truth Hatched" sold out in hours. Children reenacted moments of the speech at school assemblies. Local radio played audio clips between music. Elders spoke his name with pride. Youth carried it like fire. He didn't just speak for himself. One caller said, on a live broadcast, he spoke for Malik, for my son, for all of us. But the movement didn't end with applause. A week later, Traoré announced a new initiative, Africa First. The goals were bold and direct. Keep African resources in African hands. End exploitative contracts with foreign corporations. Enforce real anti-corruption measures even within his own administration. Create scholarship programs, startup funds, youth empowerment projects, investigate illegal offshore accounts, bring stolen wealth back home. Suddenly other nations took notice. Ghana, Ethiopia, Tanzania, even oil-rich Nigeria sent delegations to Burkina Faso. They weren't coming to offer help. They were coming to join. We are not poor, a leader said at a regional summit. We are rich nations with stolen futures. It's time we take them back. And at the center of it all was Traoré, once dismissed as a populist, now called a visionary, and to many, something more. He is the African lion. A young woman in Dakar tweeted, not because he roars, but because he protects. Across the continent, artists, educators, workers, and children embraced that image. Traoré wasn't perfect, but he was present. He had shown up in the room when no one expected him to speak, and spoke so no one could ever forget. And while Xi Jinping refused to comment further, the truth was it no longer mattered. The spotlight had shifted. The center had moved. Africa was not asking to be saved. It was standing, it was building, and now it was being heard. But Traoré didn't stop after the applause. The moment he left the summit stage, his next steps were already in motion. The speech in Geneva had made history, yes, but when the cameras turned away and the headlines faded, he returned to the dust, the desks, the broken systems still standing in his country. And that's where real leadership began. The Africa First initiative moved from vision to action. Traoré pushed through new mining laws that prioritized local ownership. He signed anti-corruption legislation that held even his closest allies accountable. He didn't just speak truth, he made it law. He launched national youth programs, funding startups, training engineers, expanding scholarships for those like Malik, who dreamed with nothing but candlelight. But the initiative wasn't just domestic. It sent shockwaves across the continent, from Ghana to Ethiopia, from Senegal to Nigeria. Governments began reviewing their own contracts. Leaders who once whispered their frustrations about foreign control were now speaking openly, quoting Traoré's words. And more importantly, they were acting. What made it different this time wasn't just policy, it was belief. The belief that Africa didn't have to imitate anyone, that it didn't need permission to reclaim what was always its own. But Traoré never claimed to be the answer. He was the start of a question, one the youth would have to finish. In speeches and interviews, he reminded everyone, I can't fix Africa. No single leader can. But I can light the torch and hand it to you. And they took it. In cities, in villages, in classrooms and marketplaces, people stopped waiting. They created. They organized. They questioned. They built. The continent had not been cured overnight, but it had awakened. And the world watched unsure whether to cheer or prepare because something had shifted. Africa was not asking. She was moving. And this time, she was not moving quietly, not with noise, not with anger, but with clarity, with purpose, and with eyes wide open. She did not knock. She walked through the door, because Africa is not asking to be seen anymore. She is standing, and this time, she will not step back. Subscribe to our channel to follow the real stories of Traoré and Africa's awakening. Because every time he speaks, the world listens. And in every corner of this continent, the next voice is already rising. We'll see you in the next story, where truth always finds its voice. Africa first, not a slogan of future,